All right. And Catherine is the designee of the Senate president. That is the seat that she's holding. The next square is Rachel. Rachel from La Fossa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, you cut out. My name is Rachel Mayu. My pronoun is she, her. My job title is the PREA liaison at La Fossa, which is Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault. I receive confidential letters from survivors who are incarcerated at DOC facilities. For the pandemic, I conducted support at LCIW for the residents who are incarcerated there.
Next is Sandra.
Okay, hi, my name is Sandra Starr. I'm a formerly incarcerated person of 26 years. I'm with the organization Vote and survivor.
Thanks, Sandra. So glad you're here.
Thank you.
Next is Becky.
Me? Sorry. So my name is Becky Konkar, and I am co-director of the Tulane Law School Women's Prison Project and also director of Tulane Law School's Domestic Violence Clinic. And so the program, I've served survivors of intimate partner violence and, for over 20 years of my legal practice. I've specialized in intimate partner violence related litigation. And we, between both programs, we work with lots and lots of survivors who are both victims in the criminal justice system and defendants in the criminal justice system, sometimes at the same time, sometimes separately. So we have like a broad combination of folks that we work with on both ends of the spectrum.
Thanks, Becky. Glad you're attending. The next square, it just says Mercedes iPhone. I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Yeah, Lieutenant Kyle Hanna.
Okay.
That's would be my wife. Sorry about that. Yeah, I've been with the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Office for over 24 years. The majority of my time here has been spent as a detective or commanding. Used to command our juvenile division, which is similar to a special victims unit regarding dealing with children, sexual, physical abuse victims, as well as elderly crimes, and everything in between that. So as well as all type of investigations from homicides down to misdemeanor thefts and everything in between. Currently, I am over our domestic violence unit here for the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Office, and also oversee all of our registered sex offenders. So I've been all over the spectrum in investigations and assisting, with victims and involved in all those type of matters I mentioned. So I'm glad to be here and I can help in any way possible.
Next is Scott.
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Payton. I'm the state director for Right on Crime for both Louisiana and Mississippi. Prior to joining Right on Crime, I was a probation and parole officer for the Louisiana DOC for a little over a decade. So I hope to bring that experience of working with victims from both ends of the spectrum to this particular task force.
Thanks, Scott. Next is Kim.
Hi, my name is Kim Kirby. I use the pronouns she and her. I am the executive director of Safe Harbor, which is a domestic violence provider for St. Tammany and Washington parishes.
Kim. Next is Mariah.
Hi, I'm Mariah Wineski. I use the pronouns she and her as well. I'm the executive director of the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, which is the statewide network of domestic violence shelter programs and non-residential advocacy programs that provide shelter and legal advocacy and housing assistance and support groups and many other services for survivors of domestic violence.
Mariah. Next is Leslie.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leslie Ricard Chambers. I serve as Deputy Executive Counsel to Governor Edwards, as well as his Criminal Justice Policy Advisor. My background is in criminal justice. I was a prosecutor in East Baton Rouge for about 8.5 to 9 years. Prior to law school, I was a victims advocate in Tangipahoa Parish. And so my scope is certainly criminal justice with the concentration of advocacy. My role now in the governor's office includes the review of clemency applications, which means that those who are applying for pardons as well as commutations of sentences. I review all of those, and I wish I could show you all how knee deep I am in files right now. But I feel very rewarded in the work that I do, and hopefully I can bring some expertise and some assistance to this group.
Thanks, Leslie. Hoping lots of those get off your desk, off your plate, off your desk. Next is Ramona.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ramona Harris. I'm the director of the Louisiana Protective Order Registry of the Louisiana Supreme Court, and we are the statewide repository for orders of protection issued in pursuant, civil or criminal, in pursuant to domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual assault. And I've been with the registry for the past 23 years.
Thanks, Ramona. Thank you. Next is Kristen.
Hi, my name is Kristen Raby. I am the Director of Victim Services here at the 19th JDC in East Baton Rouge Parish. I've been with our office for going 11 years with Mr. Moore. I've started off as a victim assistance coordinator in domestic violence and moved on to other types of crimes, and now became their director of the program. We also oversee a program that is a hospital violence intervention program. And so a lot of my work goes with setting up these programs, training our staff in trauma-informed care. And I'm just happy to be a part of this team.
Thanks, Kristen. Next is Tom.
As Executive Director of the Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops. Also represent the Catholic Charities agencies, some that do reentry programs, Cornerstone Builders, Project Save. So good to be with you all.
Thanks, Tom. Next is Francis.
Hi, my name is Francis Abbott. I serve as the Executive Director of the Louisiana Board of Pardons and Committee on Parole. We're the reason why Leslie is drowning in work over there. You know, our work, we try and promote public safety by addressing the needs of crime victims, but also providing opportunities for offenders to successfully re-enter society through the use of informed decision-making. You know, we've been, over the past 3 years, we've gotten very involved in victim outreach. We've also taken over the Crime Victim Services Bureau for the Department of Corrections. And so I hope to be able to bring our knowledge and our resources to this committee. I'm serving as Secretary LeBlanc's proxy, Secretary of the Department of Public Safety and Corrections.
Thanks, Francis. Glad you're here. Next is Tiffany.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Simpson, and I am the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Louisiana Public Defender Board.
Next, we have Ashley.
I'm here too.
Yep, just going in order of the way the squares are on the screen. So next is Ashley.
Hello, I'm Ashley Sieverson, and my pronouns are she and her. I am the Advocacy Director at Star Baton Rouge. That's the Sexual Trauma Awareness and Response Center. My department is basically the first point of contact for any survivors, and we are there for the entire process, from hospital accompaniment, from court and police accompaniment, and also we try to make sure they have the basic needs all the way from legal and counseling as well.
Next is Penny.
Hello, everyone. I'm Penny Davis. I serve as the Victim Services Liaison for the Louisiana District Attorneys Association. I've been with the DAs for about 29 years. Glad to be a part of the team. Anything we can do to assist.
Glad to have you. Next, we have Nikki.
Hi, everyone. I am Nikki Roberts. I am currently the Victim Services Attorney with the Louisiana District Attorneys Association. Previously, for the last 18 years, I was the Assistant District Attorney in Orleans Parish, specifically Chief of Juvenile. I, along with Penny and Kristen, serve as a representative from the Louisiana District Attorneys Association on this committee.
Thanks, Nikki. Next is Imani.
Hi everyone, I'm Imani. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm law and policy advocate with Tulane's Women's Prison Project.
Thanks for being here. Next is Rami.
Thank you. I'm Rami Starnes. I'm the state public defender.
Next is Miss Nagatu.
Good afternoon, I'm Tawabich Nagatu. I'm a community specialist here in the governor's office. I work closely with the Office on Women's Policy, which helps to staff the Louisiana Women's Research Commission, as well as the Domestic Violence Prevention Commission.
Thank you so much. Next is Madeline.
Hi, I'm Madeline Arufo. I use she, her, hers. I'm a reporter working with The Lens on a series of articles about the use of material witness warrants to incarcerate victims of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Thank you. Thanks for attending. Next is Mary Patricia Ray.
Hi, Mary Patricia Ray. Know most of you from prior criminal justice reform work over the last 6 or 7 years, and or from my role in John Bel Edwards' campaign back in 2015, and just very lucky, blessed to be able to work on the legislation that created this task force, and hopefully the legislation that will be passed as a result of it. And I appreciate you guys.
Okay, thanks for all your help getting us here. Next is Rachel Gassert.
Hi, I'm Rachel Gassert. I'm the Policy Director for the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. Do mostly focus on juvenile justice advocacy. And I'm just here as a member of the public to observe, and really excited to see what this group can do.
Next is Ruther.
Hi, I'm Ruther Chatwood. I work with the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement, and I apply for and manage federal funds received for the state of Louisiana for victim services, Office for Victims of Crime, Office on Violence Against Women, the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Program, and the Sexual Services Program through OVW as well.
So much, Rutha. My squares moved around a little bit. Did I call on everyone, or is there anyone who's not introduced themselves? Great. I am going to drop the text of SCR 45 that created this task force into the chat. Our next agenda item is to review the scope of the task force. And we were hoping to do some community agreements as well for these meetings. If, at Louisiana Survivors for Reform, we have a set of community agreements that we use for every meeting. And if folks have any they'd like to add, we can definitely do that. As far as the scope of the task force, this task force was created to study the link between trauma and abuse and subsequent incarceration. It is tasked with focusing more specifically in on criminalized domestic violence and sexual assault survivors who are either charged with crimes or incarcerated for crimes, especially in cases where they have been acting in self-defense and killed an abuser or were coerced into committing a crime by an abuser. And so, you know, the thoughts behind creating this, you know, we're thinking about our huge incarcerated population, you know, many, obviously not all, but many survivors of sexual abuse and interpersonal violence are women, and we have a rapidly growing women's prison population that is disproportionately Black in Louisiana, and we really want to get, you know, some questions answered about better ways to approach issues of survivors who are acting in self-defense or who are experiencing trauma and then become involved in the criminal legal system. That is how, you know, we were thinking about it when putting it together, and how Senator McMath was approaching the legislation. Do folks have other initial thoughts on parts of the legislation and what it sets out to do that particularly interested them, or would anyone share other thoughts about, you know, the scope of what we'll be working on the next couple months? Well, great. I guess we're all very agreed that that's the scope of what we're working on the next couple months. Sounds good to me. The text is there. If I'm not going to read it out loud to you, but the text is there if folks want to take a look at it again. You know, we have some clauses in there about examples of other domestic violence survivors justice acts that we could use as guidelines when thinking about how to approach these issues in our criminal legal system. We have some statistics in there that could be very helpful for what we're trying to do going forward. The next set of business is reviewing community agreements. You know, I personally think that all meetings should have agendas and all meetings should have community agreements, especially when we're on Zoom and it can be harder to know how to jump in or you know, how to have folks participate, but make space and take space. So I'll put them in the chat. The community agreements that LSR usually uses for our meetings are to listen from zero, which means, you know, really active listening to the person who is sharing and not immediately meeting it with emotions or a reaction, but you know, starting from a place of starting from a place of really trying to hear what someone is trying to say. Next, we have using I statements. You know, some of that'll be a little bit modified here in that, you know, many of us are speaking for organizations, but the spirit of that community agreement is to not talk for other people and to really, you know, speak for one's personal or professional experience. Making space and taking space is for folks to consider. You know, if you're a person who talks a lot in meetings, maybe take a step back so some other folks can feel comfortable stepping forward. And if you are a person who feels hesitant to share or feel like you've not been sharing much, that's an invitation for you to step forward and share what is on your mind. We at LSR are really focused on fostering an environment of call-in culture rather than call-out culture. We're dealing with really sensitive topics here that are personal for many of us, and for others, it's, you know, issues that we've worked on for a long time, and we want to be sure to share with a member of the group or the facilitator if something has been said or happened that feels harmful or hurtful. And also keep in mind that we're all humans and make mistakes, and we're all trying to grow and learn. So we're going to call folks in when they make mistakes or say something that has caused harm rather than call them out or shout them down. And then the last one is, it remains to be seen, right? How in-depth and intense these conversations will be. Again, for folks who are directly impacted by these issues or impacted in the way that this is what you spend your time doing for work and you're absorbing a lot of secondary trauma, it's very okay for an individual or the group as a whole to decide that we need to take a pause, give folks a minute to recover or slow down. We want these meetings to be productive and in depth and really get into the nitty gritty of things, but we also don't want folks to feel burnt out or leave, having felt way too heavy and like things moved way too fast. So those are the community agreements that we usually use. Do folks have others that they would like to add to that list or have be included in guidelines for these task force discussions? Great. MP was going to be helping with some co-facilitation duties, as we move through this agenda. And do you want us to vote on those community agreements, MP?
I mean, I guess if we're kind of using like a Robert's Rules approach, someone would make a motion, and then that we approve them, and if there's no objection, then a vote would not be required.
I will move.
A good way to handle it.
So I would make a motion that we adopt the rules that Katie has proposed.
I think Ruther has, she's made a comment, will your guidelines be made available in writing? So do we want to address that?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. Thanks, Ruther. Yeah, I will put the guidelines for sure in the minutes that get shared after this meeting, and we'll post them in the chat at the top of every meeting so that we have them in writing as we go forward. Thank you. Catherine has made a motion. Are there any objections? All right.
Yeah, and momentarily we'll have, a chair and a vice chair to run these little segments, so it won't be so weird.
Thank you. Yes, this is my first time facilitating a meeting in such a format. So any and all insight that folks have as we move through this very formal process are very welcome. The next,
great job so far, Katie.
Thank you, Catherine. The next item on our agenda is electing our chair and vice chair. We've all heard where folks are coming from with their background and how they are approaching this committee as it relates to their work. So do we have nominations for chair?
I would like to nominate Catherine Mattis for chair.
Great.
I'll second that nomination if it's required.
That's great. Again, MP, I will call on you to ask if we do we leave?
Yeah, we leave the floor open here for more nominations if there are any. Now is the time to nominate. Okay, and certainly not cutting off that time to nominate because I'm not a member of the task force, but the approach to this under a Robert's Rules approach would be that someone has made that motion and someone has already seconded the motion, and so if there is no objection to that motion, we would not need to vote on it.
Well, can I nominate Katie?
You can, as the staffing person for the task force.
Got you.
Makes the most sense. Yeah, for me to keep on with these like admin agenda tasks. But.
Okay, I withdraw that nomination.
Good. That sounds very formal. That sounds very Robert Rules-esque. Yeah. So are there other nominations for chair? We have a motion from Rachel and seconded by Francis for Catherine. All right. Hearing no objection, we have elected Catherine Mattis as chair. And so the next role is to take submissions for vice chair. Would anyone like to make a motion to nominate a vice chair?
Yes, Katie, I will nominate Leslie Ricard Chambers. You're welcome, Leslie.
I knew you were going to do that.
All right. Do we have other nominations for vice chair or seconds for Leslie?
I'll second it.
All right, hearing no other nominations and no objections, we have Leslie Ricard Chambers as our vice chair. Thank you in advance, Catherine and Leslie, and we can definitely touch base after this and kind of suss through what chair, vice chair responsibility.
Yeah, and maybe I should have asked you that before we got started.
It's in the minutes, it's there, it's on paper. So we'll talk about that after, but at least this agenda is already, created and we're moving through it. So I think you're off the hook for today responsibilities. So that is, that's all kind of the housekeeping stuff that we had to do. I guess, the other housekeeping stuff I'll mention while we're still kind of in this mode is that these meetings are scheduled already. Most folks have already gotten that calendar invite. If anyone was sort of a later addition as an appointee, I'll make sure that you get added to the calendar invites. The plan is to have once a month, a 2-hour meeting like this. And the agendas are the items for the agendas are taken directly from SCR 45. So what we are directed to do for this task force, those bullet points are outlined in the agendas as what we'll be discussing. So it's really straightforward. And the hope is that we will tackle all of those directives and get through them with any data that may have been requested that we need to move forward with our research. And be able to have substantive meetings August, September, October, and have our November meeting be reviewing and confirming a report, which then needs to be delivered to the legislature next year. So there's a, sort of TBD about a December meeting, but I know that folks are super busy. I know that Zoom meetings can kind of take a lot out of folks. Unfortunately, we can't have these in person. So the goal is to have this last through November before we wrap up and submit our report. And moving into the first kind of main topic that is broached in SCR 45, the current scope of incarcerated trauma and abuse survivors in prisons, jails, and juvenile detention centers in Louisiana. So this is where I will sort of take a step back and just start taking notes. I mean, y'all were appointed or asked to join this task force because you have, personal or professional experience around the issue of incarcerated trauma and abuse survivors. And we don't have a comprehensive report that shows those exact numbers. So sort of the first thing we wanted to do was hear from all of y'all about what your understanding of the current scope is and what you know of this issue. So I'm going to go ahead and start taking notes. If folks just want to kind of jump in and start sharing that information, that would be great. If we get a lot of folks who would like to speak, please feel free to just put your name in the chat, and we can call on folks in order if we don't want to step on each other. But yeah, the item for consideration is the current scope of incarcerated trauma and abuse survivors in prisons, jails, and juvenile detention centers in Louisiana.
I think one thing I've personally noticed is that there seems to be a lot of PTSD and PTSD related mental health issues, especially for women who are incarcerated. It also affects men, of course, but the studies that are out there are that women are affected about twice as much as men. But that's something I've seen incarcerated survivors struggle with in terms of just the nature of PTSD or trauma related or depression or anxiety related mental health disorders. The nature of prison is very loud. You don't get a lot of personal space or any personal space whatsoever. There are a lot of triggers all around you. The way that people speak to you, people you don't even know, the way they address you, and you can't escape the situation. One survivor related to me that she had to get special permission to be able to step outside when she was at work, and there was a particular person who spoke to her in a way that triggered her. She had been abused by family and intimate partners, and she needed that space and time to be able to get some air and have that recognized. A lot of times that can look like defiance to people if they don't know. So I think that it's really important for us to think of the ways trauma manifests in daily ways and how we can be sensitive to that for incarcerated survivors. And that's also kind of or it definitely is a risk factor for future victimization if you're currently incarcerated, things like mental illness or substance use and previous victimization too. So it's just kind of like this interlocking wheel with these intersecting issues.
Thank you, Rachel. I wanted to make an observation that certainly that the SCR 45 had listed, I guess it was citing an Advocate article that something, it mentioned, I think it was 25% of women who had killed, who were in for homicide. And I don't want to misstate what the article, it shows that approximately 1/4 of all women in Louisiana who have been sentenced to life are victims of domestic violence. And I'm going to suggest that that is a preposterously low estimate, I would be very surprised, and I can, sort of look to Sandra, perhaps, or even Francis. My guess is that number is much closer to 85 or 90%, if not even higher. And so, I think I know that we don't have data, hard data, but we certainly have some information, both anecdotal as well as national data, that I think is really important for us to be aware of and mindful of, that it's a hugely prevalent problem. And it's prevalent not just with our women population, but also our men population, right? I do work with the Women's Prison Project, but I'm also the director of Tulane's Criminal Justice Clinic, where most of our clients are men. And I'm going to say that, at least 50% that will share with me have also been victims of abuse and neglect as children, and have suffered traumas that have informed and led their path to incarceration. So I don't think we can underestimate this problem. And I think that one of the things we can certainly do is start educating, and we as the task force can start educating the legislators as well as other policymakers about the prevalence. And certainly one place would be that advocate number is very misleading, I think. And so I do think that ought to be one of the goals here. And certainly is one of the goals that we have at the Women's Prison Project, is to be reaching out to policymakers, legislators, lawyers, and law enforcement to make sure that they're clear about how big a problem this is, and that it's not just a women's problem, right? It's a men's problem too. I think are pretty important. Sandra, I don't know, I sort of pointed to you, but is that consistent with your experience? Certainly. We have you.
Okay, talking about the number of population, the number.
Just how prevalent, how many women in your experience who are incarcerated here in the DOC facilities have been, the victims of trauma and abuse?
Over half the population are involved in being victimized themselves, whether through their charge, whether they're for being a victim or drugs, which led them to victim. Mm. I would say prevalently half the population.
Yeah. And those are probably just the people who share, right? A lot of people don't want to share. And
a lot of them don't want to talk about it because they don't want to be in the spotlight or ridiculed or just coming out.
Right. Attempting to take on my unexpected role as chair. Does anyone, and I'm trying also to look at the agenda that Katie provided. Hold on one sec. I just printed it off.
Yeah, this is the main discussion point for today. The other pieces that we are set out to tackle involve that are on future agendas involve current procedures utilized by law enforcement, methods to capture data on trauma and abuse. Folks should feel free to wrap those into the discussion, and ultimately the goal is for this task force to make recommendations on legislation to provide relief for criminalized survivors and prevent this cycle of violence from continuing. So, please feel free to go beyond this one agenda item, but this is the bulk of today. So people should feel free to share.
Well, I'm sorry.
Well, I think, we've kind of identified a problem just from these few little comments we've already had with Ms. Mattis. I saw Ms. Concar's motioning up, indicating it's underreported, and from Ms. Starr as well. And in my experience as a classification officer in an all-male facility, where, oftentimes I've done, I can't even tell you how many PREA checklists, PREA questionnaires I've had to do. And, you see where individuals may be looking around whenever they're answering or whatever it is, or you can see a previous one where the answer has changed all of a sudden, that, maybe they either feel comfortable with you or don't feel comfortable talking to you. And you see that they reported something differently the last time. But that is going to be a huge issue in getting accurate statistics, is just that stigma, individuals worrying about being, whether it's just sharing the information, being re-victimized. So I think data collection is going to be difficult. So we need to come up with some strategies to make sure we can capture this data and represent it as best as possible for our populations that we serve.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem nationally. I don't know, Becky, do you have, I know you've looked at a lot of data and resources around the country. Can you maybe touch on some of the problems with getting hard numbers, or where we are with hard numbers that you're aware of?
Well, I do think that there's some national data that suggests that well over 80% of incarcerated women in general have a history of intimate partner violence or trauma of some kind, and that women, unlike men, tend to enter prison having experienced multiple victimizations across the lifespan, multiple different types of victimizations, whether it's childhood abuse, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and so tend to enter with more complex trauma. But in terms of data collection, obviously for both men and women, the type of data collection that Francis is talking about is also challenging, because people are entering a system where any demonstration of weakness could make them vulnerable to other people. And so to self-disclose, trauma or victimization is really counter to the culture that we have in both men and women's prisons. And so I do think there's some challenges to getting that type of data, particularly when if you have to rely on DOC to collect the data. Obviously the other challenges are going to just involve how the questions are asked, right? Because different demographic groups are more or less likely to self-identify as victims, even though they may have the same experiences as women who self-identify as victims. And so, standardization in terms of how those questions are asked and how the criteria is assessed, I think is actually really, really important.
So, it may be challenging for us to get any hard numbers, but we can certainly start looking at and investigating, and maybe folks can bring with them sort of sources and resources of some of those numbers that at least we don't have, if we can't get accurate numbers, we can certainly approximate and show that. I think it's going to be very important when we present this information that we're clear to the policymakers and legislators that this is a huge and prevalent problem, that it's not just a small minority of folks who it impacts. I think from our various organizations, we may have access to different resources and different information that we can pull together and sort of run through. And was that, Katie, did you mention that maybe it was the next meeting that we were going to be more focused on data?
Let me check these draft agendas. Yeah, the next meeting, the focus is more the current procedures utilized by law enforcement, DAs, courts, public defenders to screen for trauma and abuse, and also methods to capture data on trauma and abuse who are in DOC custody, which, you know, it feels like it would be helpful today to hear from law enforcement folks and LDAA folks about what screening
looks like
are in place right now. And maybe that way we can be thinking expansively about if there's a shift for next time. And also, you know, from the service providers we have on, like Mariah and Ashley and Kim, to hear what y'all hear from your clients and know of this.
Do the, so I know we have a couple representatives from the DA's office and a couple representatives from the public defender's offices. Do the DAs or the public defenders have any data that they might be collecting? I mean, in a sense, I would imagine, I mean, obviously the DA is going to have some data on the number of charges they file for domestic violence charges, but is there any other information that they might be collecting?
Kristen, do you know, or do you recall whether or not when you were sort of being at the front lines of engaging a victim throughout the process, was there a process in which you collected information on whether or not, you know, that person had been abused before by the same person or by different people, or whether or not they had a history in their lifetime at all of experiencing these types of traumas that we're going to be focusing on?
Yes, we actually, as the victim assistance coordinators, were taking that into account as we did our assessments when we would create a profile for each victim that we're working with. I don't think it's an office-wide collection where the office creates it in their database, but we now probably we've had this database that we are on now probably about 5 years going, where we do try to record that information. We have it to where one of the questions is, has this victim been victimized before? So we actually can start pulling that information. But it's, like I said, it's only for those that actually have a coordinator attached to it. So I would have to look into our other database system to see if that's something that we are tagging as well there. But we are definitely collecting that information because we want to know going forward. The prosecutors want to know, you know, has this, you know, is this a reoccurrence? Is this the same thing that's been happening? Stuff like that. What are other safety measures that were put in place? So yes, our office is collecting that information.
And are y'all able to cross-reference whether or not any of those victims also become prosecuted? Because for obvious reasons, if you start seeing the same victims over and over again, at some point in time, you can expect that they would also be put on the docket or also arrested. And, you know, that sort of creates some history for you all to educate you all on who this person is being prosecuted, and you get to see that they've actually been recorded victims, and not just, you know, somebody that just was arrested for a crime, whether it's a violent crime or a simple battery or what have you. So are y'all able to make those cross references from time to time?
We are able to sometimes. I do know that information, especially if it's collected through the VAC, is turned over, and we will be able to inform the prosecutor, hey, this person was a victim of this crime back in 2017 or such and such. So yeah, we are able to cross-reference. I can't say 100% of the time, but we do definitely. And I think that's something that we could try to make sure as a really a stronger push for.
Kristen, I think that's I'm sorry to interrupt, Leslie. I was just, because I thought your question was a really important one. And I guess my question to Kristen, and I don't know if you know the answer, is that's what you're doing in East Baton Rouge, right?
Yes, right.
And do you know, is that how prevalent? I mean, I don't, do we have another representative from the DA's Association? How prevalent is keeping that kind of information and that cross-referencing, which I think, as Leslie pointed out, it almost seems inevitable and is so important.
I know for here, we started, our office has been really keen on trying to target domestic violence and sexual assault violence. So I know what we've started here, we're trying to help other offices, you know, if they want to adopt some of the initiatives that we have started. I can't, maybe Penny would be able to tell you, I don't know for sure what the other offices are doing, but we have several initiatives that we have started when it comes to domestic violence, intimate partner violence.
And do you keep actual data? I mean, I know Leslie asked you if you cross-reference, but do you keep the data on how many of the people who've been listed as victims, say, of intimate partner violence or sexual assault, then are later charged?
I get back to you on that one. I want to say yes, but I don't want to speak too soon. I know, like I said, this new initiative that we've started is collecting that, but this initiative it's called our Stop the Loss initiative. So that's different prior to what we were doing before. So because what you just asked is I don't know for sure. I'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah, and can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna check with our IT here at LGAA. I do know that we do have centralized data that we are collecting for the DA's offices. What all that data entails, I have to get more information on it. And so I'll be able to report that back to you all as well.
That'd be great. That would be interesting. And I guess how many parishes are providing data, and do they even do this measure? I mean, it sounds like Kristen's, being that, I suspect a lot of the rural parishes may not have the, separate victims advocates. I don't know if that's true or not, but.
Yeah, I will work on getting that information for you all.
That'd be cool. Yeah. So that was the DA, the public defender, Remy, or who else? We had someone else with the
Tiffany and Remy, the public defender reps. Right,
Remy and Tiffany. I mean, so
we don't collect that data specifically. What we collect data for is our statutory mandated data collection for our annual report, which is quite extensive. But in the process of doing that, I'm sure there's a way to look in there and find crudely some of this information, but we don't have a specific a collection for this exact type of things. We certainly wouldn't have anything like the DAs were describing, where we take it from a victim's perspective and look at it. Has this person been victimized before, or things of that nature? I don't know that we would have the ability to do that.
Right. And certainly some of it's hard to get at, right? I mean, again, having those conversations with a client who is arrested for car theft or something like that, most lawyers don't engage in those conversations, which is one of the things that, our organization, Women's Prison Project, is trying to train defense lawyers as well as prosecutors on figuring out ways that they can make sure their radar is up for that, and so that can inform their practice. But certainly that would be a challenge, I can see. What about where are we with maybe law enforcement folks?
One more question for the public defender folks, because there's a question from MP in the chat. Is there any uniform collection of data about past trauma or abuse from criminalized survivors at this time? So, thinking about the mitigation that gets done by public defenders for their clients. Is that something, Remy and Tiffany, that we would have to approach the districts for if, they were doing widespread or partial data collection on the past trauma of their clients? Or is that something that you're saying you can pull from this statutorily mandated report?
I don't know. I was thinking there might be an easy way to find something crudely about this. I doubt seriously if the district's collecting data that's tailored the way that you would like it for these purposes. It's just not victim centric. It's accused person centric type data, and of course they report it to us. But I don't know of any district that collects data the way that you're describing.
No, I think we might be misunderstanding each other though, because what I'm talking about is for the accused folks. It would seem that if someone was representing a person who, a homicide happened in the course of a domestic violence incident, that would be brought into, the defense of that person's case. And so I'm not talking about, if we're looking at this as a binary, the victim's perspective in the case, I'm talking about data on the past of the accused person, especially if the incident was happening because they were being abused.
Well, there may be a way of collecting that.
So
are you talking about something that's raised as an affirmative defense, or something that is something that would be case specific for each? Fact specific on a case by case basis. I don't know how you would compile data. Certainly those cases exist, but I don't know how you would compile that data.
And yeah, I think that gets, it certainly is complicated, because remember, that information is confidential between the defense lawyer and the accused. It also assumes that the lawyer is investigating that aspect and looking into that mitigation, which isn't always the case. One of the things we've seen in going over all the cases of women who are incarcerated for killing an abusive partner, we're looking at those records here in the Women's Prison Project, and we see that the lawyers haven't historically in the past, in many instances, haven't had the expertise or the knowledge or the information they needed to adequately develop that as a defense or understand the dynamics. There are a lot of issues that really are going to require we're going to require a lot of training for defense lawyers to even recognize and know to ask that. So, obviously, I think too, it's much easier when you're talking about a person who kills an abusive partner. But what about all the cases? We are also aware that a lot of cases for things like drug possession, drug sales, sex work, sex trafficking, economic crimes can all be related to intimate partner violence and that relationship and coercion. And again, I think, and this is where I'm getting on my soapbox a little bit, but is one of the things we have to do is we have to start educating lawyers and judges, people who, if they understood, would want to do something, but just don't understand that nexus and don't understand that connection. And so it's hard to get data when we're not probing and asking the right questions. But we should get what data we can, and then we can talk about the ways which we think the data isn't complete and maybe underreporting because of all these features. And then figure out ways we can try to fix, try to improve that.
I know one source that that would be a great resource, and one piece of the puzzle, it wouldn't show us the whole thing, of course, but I know PREA was mentioned earlier. by the Board of Parole. Whenever someone is in the intake process, the Prison Rape Elimination Act requires that the incarcerated person is deemed either at risk or previous victimization or at risk of being an offender. And they're tried to keep separate. A lot of people do self-identify. It was mentioned in our discussion earlier that a lot of, for safety reasons, some people don't. And that's especially prevalent at men's facilities. But I think if we could collect that, that would be a good springboard. What percentage of people are identified as having experienced past trauma or seem at risk of that versus who might be classified as offender. Conversationally, from people I've spoken with in DOC, from their experience, they feel that most offenders that they've met were victimized at some point. So
I don't know if maybe Francis or something, no, but is Assistant Warden Burks collecting that? Maybe Sandra doing some kind of screening as for folks who go into DOC at LCIW? I don't know if you knew Rachel or no.
I do. I have contacts in the mental health department. I could certainly confer with them. I mean, they're federally obligated to do that screening. How they keep the data, I don't know for sure exactly how they organize that, but I would love to reach out.
Yeah. And I guess, so we sort of at least touched on the defense bar, the district attorneys, some of DOC. The sheriff, did the sheriffs in local sheriffs, is that part of any kind of screening process when folks are being admitted into a parish facility?
It's Lieutenant Hannah with Ascension. I can check with our prison here in the parish. I'm not real familiar if they're screening intakes, females, but I guarantee it'd be easy to find out.
Right.
I mean, we could just pull the case reports, and that'd be easily accessible.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I mean, it'd be really interesting. Not only, I mean, I don't know if it's uniform across different parishes, if there's some sort of uniform requirement about what has to be checked off before someone is admitted, but that obviously would be helpful to know. And do they do something different for men and women, or do they do the same for both?
Yeah, I can definitely find out. That'd be easy to obtain.
Yeah,
for sure.
That'd be great.
And I think another component to that also is the collecting the data, but who's housing the data for each agency, I think is something also that's important. Because collecting it is one thing, but where all that data is stored for each agency is also another concern.
Yeah. In what sense, Penny, though? I mean, what are you getting?
And I wouldn't say a concern. It would just be a more so where the data is being housed for each agency so that it can all collaborate at some point.
Right, I guess cross communication.
Right, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that I suspect, having worked with groups from different organizations in the criminal justice, that there is no communication. If this topic is like so many others, we could all benefit from that. That would be great. Well, I mean, I think if everyone sort of can look in their respective organizations to figure out if there is a data collection, not only in your specific office, but in parallel offices around the state that you're aware of, what is being collected, who's keeping that collection, how is it being collected, and what results are. If we come back at our next meeting with sort of report backs, that could be a useful place to start, at least to try to get a snapshot of what's going on in Louisiana. And I know that we've had some reports too, and maybe Becky, I don't know if you are able to fill that hole in, but there've been some reports. I'm trying to think if it's been through Pew or Vera. Maybe Francis might know. I don't know if someone else might know too. Reports on more specific Louisiana data. There was that big report that came out that was published by the ACLU, was it?
Yeah, that was the Amnesty International.
Amnesty International report. That might be something we could circulate among this group members. Have folks seen the Amnesty? Why don't we circulate that? I think that.
Yeah, that sounds great. I in the course of taking these minutes, you know, I'm noting what the kind of follow-up is for what agencies and who's getting data and who's having questions answered. So I'll be sure to bump those out in the email so everyone knows what they're tracking down. You know, ideally, if people got that information relatively early before our next meeting in September, I could circulate it and any relevant reports to the group in advance, so people had a little bit of time to look at it. And you know, it's similarly, I'd love to hear again from some of the providers. And I know that I'm not a medical provider, so I don't always understand what can be shared and what is HIPAA protected. And so, you know, in a circumstance where a victim services agency has been serving a survivor of interpersonal violence, and then they find themselves in the position of being prosecuted as a criminalized survivor, how much do y'all know about that? What data exists there? Is there any sharing or communication about that? I know it's really complicated with client confidentiality.
Just speaking from STAR, I know that during our intake process, we don't ask specific questions about intimate partner violence or things that have happened in the past, but it usually comes up. So we wouldn't have specific data to be able to just show exactly the numbers in that aspect. But if you could tell me how far back you want to go with that data, I could probably pull it up for each client and try to figure that out, and then continue going until we finish in November to have that amount of data. But other than that, we don't actually have a specific box to check off just for those type of questions. We usually focus on whatever assault they're dealing with in that moment.
Gotcha. So you have the data on the assault they've experienced that moment, but maybe not past sexual abuse or family abuse or anything previous.
Yeah, but a lot of times they'll bring up past abuse, and we will mark that off in the intake process. So we do have it, but it's not for everyone specifically if they didn't bring it up themselves.
No, but Ashley, those are for people who aren't necessarily involved in the criminal legal system as defendants. Correct?
Yes.
Right. So I think we're trying to capture the world of folks who are involved as defendants in the criminal legal system.
Well, I can get with our legal team and find out specifically, because sometimes they have clients that the advocacy team doesn't have. So I can definitely get with them and try to find out if they have any data on it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and to Catherine's point, that's what I was going to say as well, is that typically with I guess the traditional victim service organizations, you know, we're more likely to interact with a survivor either pre-incarceration or post-incarceration, and our data. So the data that we would have is not necessarily what we're looking for right now. It's kind of the opposite, right? So like we may be able to tell you, you know, everyone that we interact with is a domestic violence survivor. So
right.
we may be able to say, you know, of those, what percentage are formerly incarcerated? But that's not necessarily the same piece of data.
But that could be useful, right? I mean, it's coming at the same problem, maybe from the back end, right? So,
right.
And since we're not going to get accurate, I mean, it's, you know, for all the problems that we've talked about and that Becky mentioned, it seems pretty clear we're not going to get, you know, hard, fast, accurate numbers. We're going to get an approximation. Mm-hmm. And if we can have that approximation from sort of both sides, it certainly seems like it might be helpful.
Yeah, and that's something that we can reach out to the programs. We've got 16 across the state, and we can reach out to. I don't know specifically, and Kim, you may be better able to answer this about what an individual program. I don't think that I don't think that they're necessarily asking that consistently in screening and intake, but I do know that it typically is going to come up, right? Because if you're helping somebody find housing, it's going to come up as a barrier to housing and things like that. But I don't think it's necessarily something that they're tracking in a database. But at the same time, it could be something that we could quickly do a survey and get a summary or a snapshot of folks who are being served right now and use that as a data point.
And actually, I might ask Becky, who runs the domestic violence clinic, because I know that actually is the genesis of the Women's Prison Project, where she was having clients who she was representing in the domestic violence clinic who were getting arrested, and she'd come over to across the hall and say, you know, my client's now been arrested. So I imagine you also might have some of that data, and maybe also the FJC.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, you know, the FJC certainly would have a lot of client data where, you know, we're working with survivors in the civil legal system, and then suddenly, you know, she's trying to get her child back from a visit, right, where the abusive partner won't return the child and she ends up arrested because she's at his house, or, you know, whatever it is. So I think that particularly, I mentioned the FJC because it's a large service provider, and I think they would probably have some numbers. And they track a lot of data around like survivors that they're working with who ultimately, you know, who end up being criminalized in one way or the other. I mean, very often, you know, those charges sometimes might get dismissed or whatever, but, you know, of course, those incidents can be the precursor to these bigger incidents that we talk about, right? Where, you know, really prevent survivors from being able to access law enforcement resources in the future. So I think there will be victim service agencies who probably do have information about, you know, survivors who have been involved in the system, both as victims and then later as defendants.
Is just so for those folks who don't know, FJC is the Family Justice Center. And I don't know, Becky, or is there someone here who might be able to ask them for if they have those numbers?
I mean, certainly, I think many of us here have worked with the FJC and could reach out to them to see if they have relevant information. I mean, I know this is an issue that they care about a lot as well.
Yeah, and I think as you're saying that, I think one of the things too is, you know, we in the Women's Prison Project are, you know, focused quite a bit on women who are incarcerated, serving, you know, life or long sentences, who can connect their incarceration to being IPV victims, intimate partner violence victims. But of course, you know, so much damage is done when the person is just arrested, incarcerated for just a couple days, and then charges are dismissed or never brought and released. And those numbers we don't have and wouldn't be able to capture. And yet that's when they lose their job, their children, their apartments, their, you know, all the other consequences that I think we all have some sense of. So it looks like, yeah, I mean, I think anyone who thinks they might have access to either one side of these kind of data points, this would be very helpful if we could get that to Katie and sort of see what we get, and then sort of report back at the next meeting.
Yeah, that would be great. You know, and if folks have, reports that they've read or you know, more questions that are coming up when you're looking for the data, that is, I think, helpful to consider too, because ideally we would connect all these dots in what is missing and how data is collected and who can actually access it.
So one of the things too, Katie, you did mention this, and I just, I don't want to, that we have scheduled meetings, the next 3, I think, meetings. I do have to share that I teach every Tuesday at 2:45, which means I'd have to leave by 2:30 at the latest, probably even a little earlier. So I don't know how folks, if it works for folks at all to move our meetings up a half hour. I don't know if that's a feasible thing or not. If not, I can leave. I mean, we can just leave it, and I can just leave a few minutes early and turn it over to the very capable hands of my vice chair.
Why it's a, yeah, that's why it's a duo team.
Yeah, and then that's fine too. And maybe that can work as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely okay with earlier. I see in the chat that Ruth is okay with it. Is that absolutely a no-go for anyone to move these from 12:30 to 2:30? The dates that they're scheduled? Great. Well, I will amend those calendar invites and make sure that everyone is on them.
Well, thank you. And I certainly appreciate folks accommodating. It sort of feels obnoxious to ask people to accommodate my schedule, but unfortunately I can't move my class. that I don't get to do.
Chairman's privilege.
Thank you.
Do anyone that we haven't talked about specifically, do y'all have thoughts about data from your agency that could be helpful in this way? I mean, you know, I don't know if LCLE collects any amount of data that would be helpful. You know, just so we can really see what numbers we're working with. If there are other thoughts on places we should be looking for numbers.
This is Ramona. I would like to just offer if any statewide data is needed. I have data on the number of orders per parish and that sort of thing. So if that is needed, I certainly can provide that to this committee.
That'd be great. Ramona, is there, and I'm going to just, is there any way to cross-reference the people who, in the protective orders that you have, if any of those people in those protective orders subsequently got arrested?
Well, certainly, I mean, if we were studying a case and we had someone who was incarcerated and you needed me to find out if there was an existing protective order, I could do that. I don't know if I could share that openly, but if we were working on the case, I could certainly verify that.
And so, right, and that would be on an individual basis. I was actually just thinking, you know, and I can't imagine there is, but it would be obviously in the fantasy world to have all the, you know, all the people who had protective orders protecting them, and then sort of also be able to cross-reference with all the people who then were arrested. That could be a very interesting data point.
That could be interesting. It's certainly not something we're doing now.
Right.
You know, and in the scope of what we do, but that certainly is interesting. Yeah.
I guess as the representative of DOC, I mean, we would have access to anybody who's serving on felony charges. So I mean, I probably need name, date of birth, you know, but could cross-reference anything with, you know, what we have. But again, that would only be for felony currently serving and maybe on supervision.
And Francis, it doesn't, your data wouldn't be able to capture people who are no longer serving.
I don't know. That's a difficult one. I'm not sure what the retention for our electronic information is. But you know, it's something that we can talk about.
Yeah, it's just that making that comparison is an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, obviously it would take some legwork, but interesting. Okay, well, I mean, something to think about.
Kate, is our agenda from today, our minutes today, going to have action items?
Yes. I will bump out all the action items and who's assigned and put that, it'll be in the minutes that I send out, but I'll also put it in the body of the email. So the other question I had, and I don't know, Mariah, if this is a question for you, the domestic violence fatality review board that was created this legislative session, how fast is that moving? How much overlap do you think the work y'all are doing there could have with some of these questions?
It is not going to be moving fast enough to give you data that you want for this process. It's established, like the legislation passed that kind of sets the framework within LDH for a fatality review panel, but it is not funded. And so we have just submitted a grant in partnership with LDH to get it funded, but we don't know, and I don't think we'll know until October whether that's even funded. And then there will be the process of getting all of the procedures in place and things like that. So I don't think that that's something that could necessarily be useful. There is, even without the full fatality review, LDH does have they still have data on all violent deaths. So they have it's National Violent Death Reporting System, NVDRS, that they have that has some information on whether domestic violence was involved or whether one of the people that was involved, whether it's the victim of the death incident or whether it's the perpetrator in the death incident, whether they were previously or whether there was an indication in any formal record that they were a victim of domestic violence. So I think that data does exist a little bit already, but I would need to get with LDH about how fleshed out that is. And they only have 1 year of data, full data. They only have 2020 right now, 2020 deaths right now.
Okay, that's interesting though. I mean, LDH is obviously swamped right now, and they have a lot going on. If you think that there's a way to request that so we can look at it, I think that would be great. And also, I mean, would it be helpful for y'all's work getting that set up with an LDH if we were to if this report was to like make a recommendation that sort of this kind of angle be tracked within that review? I mean, what's your vision for how these can maybe work together at all?
Yeah, I mean, we're happy to accept any recommendation that this task force comes with. I think I do think that this task force is going to be it'll be issuing its recommendations in plenty of time for LDH to take them into consideration in forming their, because it's just, state agencies they move at their own pace, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think we can definitely look at those pieces, and we're happy to kind of incorporate that. I think we're open to it. We have to cover, obviously, the legislation that created the fatality review has really specific parameters on what it has to cover, but it doesn't stop the team from looking at other aspects as well.
And it would seem, and maybe this is sort of obvious, but that one of the recommendations we as a task force might be able to make is that certain kinds of data, that certain agencies or entities be ordered to, or rules implemented to ask certain kinds of agencies to collect certain kind of data for future information and reference.
Yes, and I know there's also some with the process of NVDRS, and I think that the same will be true when the full fatality review starts, but there's nothing that mandates criminal justice entities to actually give the records. So there are, even with NVDRS being kind of the hub for that data, there's still a lot of gaps because some coroners and prosecution and law enforcement, it just kind of depends. It's patched, pieced together because it's voluntary as to what records you send.
Well,
I'm happy to ask. I mean, I work really closely with the lady at LDH who runs the NVDRS project, so I'm happy to ask her what she has.
Right. I mean, it's certainly, so much policy and legislation is driven by data, and we don't have data. So it may be that the first step and the best thing we can do is actually just figure out ways to make sure that data is available that can inform future legislation. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So unglamorous, but like absolutely the right for making informed decisions. Well, I don't want to move us off this, part about the current scope and what we know about incarcerated survivors currently in Louisiana. Do folks have final thoughts before we talk about the public testimony aspect? Oops. Great. So we have the the agenda sort of laid out to follow the path of the text of the resolution. But something that we wanted to know from this group is, we're all bringing different expertise and different agency knowledge to the table, but who would it be helpful for this group to hear from? We're able to make requests to have folks come speak to us and share what research they're doing or share about their personal experience. And if folks feel like they have gaps in their knowledge, or there's a group of folks or an individual they'd love to hear from, please share, and I can do the kind of legwork of trying to get folks to come present at these meetings.
Well, I certainly would like, actually, Becky Concar's husband, Marcus Concar, who's a professor of sociology at Loyola and does a lot of work in this area. Specifically, he is his area is data collection. And I certainly, I know he's worked with Francis and the DOC and a lot of other entities and had access and may be able to give us some of the data that we might be looking for, and certainly tell us where the holes are, because I know that he's made that his sort of, at least in part, his professional work is trying to collect data on intimate partner violence and homicide and a lot of these issues. So I think it could be very helpful to hear what numbers he can give us. I think he's also got all the data on who's serving what in DOC. I mean, obviously Francis, but I think he's organized it in ways that we can pull out specific questions and he could provide it with. And I think that could be very useful to hear. And it might make sense if he's available to have him come to the next meeting, since we might be, again, sort of talking about those the data information that we get.
Yeah, that sounds great. I will reach out to Marcus to see if he can make it to the next meeting. Other folks or experts that y'all would like to hear from?
Whenever you reach out, can we reach out and maybe speak to him? That way, I think we can kind of steer him in the right direction so that we don't have to wait till the next meeting to tell him what maybe
we want.
Yeah. Have a conference call with a couple of us, whoever wants to be on that.
Yeah.
That way, we're not, I don't want to say wasting a meeting with bringing him up, but at least, kind of giving him a heads up. And
I think that's a good idea.
Ideas around.
Right, that's a good idea. Do we have Francis? I think you just volunteered to be on that conference call. And do we have, other folks who are interested in this data question and who might want to be a part of that call as well? Well, we can certainly maybe, if anyone who might be volunteering for that to join in that conference call.
I don't know how this person feels about it, but I would love to hear from Ms. Ciprian at LCIW. She's the mental health director. I think she would be a wonderful resource. She has a lot of direct experience, and she's really emotionally invested into the survivors and residents of LCIW.
And Rachel, are you envisioning her coming to the talk about the data, or really more at a different meeting talking about some of the other topics I think that we're gonna probably be covering?
Either or. The thing is, I was thinking she would have a lot of data, but I don't know that for a fact. So that may be something that, you know, remains to be seen about the specifics of that.
Okay, great. Rachel, can you just drop her name in the chat so I make sure that I kind of get the spelling right and track down the right person? I would, you know, Catherine, I know that we have you here and we had Becky here, who are attorneys who could kind of unravel how this happens, how it goes down in a court case. I mean, I think a presentation like that would be interesting. I think especially if maybe we could have a representative from a DA's office, you know, specifically an ADA perhaps, who has worked on one of these recent cases where a sentence has been shortened or has been looked at and someone's been, you know, released because these realizations came to light about what the actual situation was all these years later. So if from your work, anyone comes to mind.
Sure. I'm sure we can come up with some folks. Yeah, I mean, I think we certainly have been able, through our representation of clients and also just looking at cases of you know, potential future clients, been able to identify some themes about areas where the legal system has failed to intervene and where it's structured, the laws as they're written are structured in ways that prevent consideration of the mitigation of intimate partner violence. And it happens from basically the point of contact with law enforcement all the way through to appellate and post-conviction representation in the courts. And, you know, I hate to say it, but I think we can condemn with a broad paintbrush all aspects of our criminal legal sentence. And no one is immune from contributing to this problem. So I think we definitely would like to share what we've been learning, which again I think can help pinpoint some of the target areas for the task force's you know, goals.
Right.
And so I don't know, maybe if we want to do that at not the next meeting, but the following one, maybe. I don't know if that fits in with what the agenda items look like. Katie, maybe you can sort of peg that out.
Yeah, you know, I will. I'll get with you and Leslie, and we can look over the agendas. You know, we got them looked over and approved by Senator McMath's office, but now that we have a chair and a vice chair, we can certainly rearrange things and have speakers the way we think makes the most sense. So we'll find a time to do that and get everything, you know, in an order that makes sense.
Great.
All right. And if folks have other ideas that, you know, come up for them or people that you, you know, come to mind that you'd like to hear from, please just email and let me know. I'm happy to do the legwork on reaching out. The final agenda item we have is just other business. So that sort of encompasses, you know, anything we didn't get to today that folks would like to discuss, as well as any questions or comments from folks who are attending in a public capacity who would like to weigh in on this task force.
I want to apologize. I didn't see that agenda item. I would have saved my time request move for that appropriate agenda topic, other business. Whoops.
All good.
Katie, this is Lieutenant Hannah again. I don't know, in our intro, was I supposed to tell you I'm a designee for Speaker of the House, Clay Shake Snyder? Was that relevant in any way?
Oh, I mean, I'm sorry. I probably should have mentioned that when I was going through, but
I wasn't sure if y'all needed to know that, but anyway, there it is. Just wanted to make sure. I don't know if I need to say that or not, but I don't want to forget it.
appreciate it. Thank you, Lieutenant.
All right, you're welcome.
Well, hearing no other business, we're going to get out a couple minutes early. Again, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and we had so many folks here with such a wide variety of expertise, and these are really difficult systems and topics to navigate, but I feel very emboldened by the folks on this call and the commitment to kind of sorting through how to make this better for our state and the people we know who are so vulnerable. So thanks everyone. And I believe we need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I will second that.
Mattis can get to class.
I will second that motion.
Excellent. All right, y'all. Everyone have a great day. Rest of your week. Talk soon.
Thank you.
You too, Katie.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.